Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can subscribe to Cutting Through at mitchellplitnick.substack.com, where you can also donate to support this work. And if you find this valuable, please like and share Cutting Through with your friends and contacts. The more viewers we have, the more support we get, and the more we can continue to bring you this sort of content. I want to talk again about a subject I've touched on recently already, and that is the attack on a march uh, that was organized by the Jewish community in Boulder, Colorado, in support of uh, the Israeli hostages that are still being held in Gaza. Um, this is already this has been being taken, I would say, particularly by the Trump administration, as the impetus for really pushing forward with a lot of anti-free speech laws, anti-Palestinian laws, really advancing the program for criminalizing the movement to end the genocide in Gaza and to end the ethnic cleansing that is going on in the West Bank, and to end the occupation in general. This is happening in a number of different ways from a number of different sources. The Trump administration is one place, the Jewish community is another, that is continuing to advance the specious notion and the false notion, quite frankly, that this attack was anti-Semitism. It was not. I can't stress this enough. This isn't really a gray area. Neither, frankly, was the attack in DC, but fewer people seem to be moving forward on that. There'll be a bill coming to the House of Representatives this coming week that will, in its preamble, at least imply that the very term Free Palestine is anti-Semitic. So, I mean, we are inching closer and closer to the idea that you can't even say that Palestinians deserve the same basic rights as everyone else without being called an anti-Semite under the law. And that should scare the hell out of everybody. I think we also need to look at, again, this incident and this event. This was an event that was put on by the Jewish community, but it was it was not an apolitical event. It was not, nor was it meant as a Jewish event. It was meant as very explicitly a political statement supporting the hostages, which there is, and let me stress this, not only nothing wrong with, that's perfectly fine. Um, and something that in fact is a very legitimate and important call. Every hostage, and I've said this, as anyone who's watched my videos before knows, I have said this many, many times, every single hostage in Gaza needs to be freed. So do the hostages being held by Israel. But if we're talking about the people being held in Gaza, uh, since October 7th, 2023, those people should never have been taken. It was completely illegitimate to do that. Hostage taking is a clear crime under international law. It's not ambiguous, and they should be freed immediately and unconditionally. And yes, so should Palestinian prisoners who Israel has been taking for years under the guise of administrative detention or just under the guise of picking them up and throwing them in a cell. All of these things have gone on. They're all wrong. But it is fine that people, and it is, I think, expected that people will focus on one side or the other of that equation. And certainly it is legitimate for people to go out and march um, uh, in support of the hostages. And if they're attacked the way they were at this march, then absolutely that is a crime. And indeed, the person who committed that crime is in police custody, is in jail, which is not wrong. That is what should happen. That doesn't make it anti-Semitic. It makes it a crime. And it doesn't have to be anti-Semitic to be a crime. I think one person, I saw this and it kind of spurred me to make this video. An activist who's not, as far as I know, primarily active on this issue, but on other ones, but is an Israeli who lives in Boulder. He is an IDF veteran, and he wrote a very long, it's a public piece. I'm not going to say his name because I don't know how much attention he really wants personally. But you can just, you can find the full post that he made on my Facebook page. So, I'm not keeping any secrets here. Um, and he started his post like this, and I'm quoting here. He's talking, actually, let me before I quote him, this is talking about an event as I understand it, um, an event that was well, actually, let me just read what he wrote, and I think you'll understand. At the Boulder JCC vigil for the attack on the Israeli march, when the crowd sang Hatikva, the anthem of a state raising Gaza, I didn't hear healing. I heard nationalism. I was ashamed, not of grief, but of the pageantry, the self-congratulation, the refusal to acknowledge the blood being spilled in our name. This wasn't an apolitical act of mourning. It was a pro-Israel rally in all but name, complete with the Israeli consul general and rabbis wearing Israeli military dog tags on stage. Let's stop pretending otherwise. You can't publicly celebrate a military campaign and then cry anti-Semitism when there's a backlash. So as I understand it, this was a gathering in the wake of the attack on the March for the Hostages. The people that he describes at this event included several prominent Palestinian, one politician and one community leader in Boulder, and he makes it, I think, very clear that there were people there who were really trying to say, look, the attack on the march was not okay. The holding of hostages is not okay. Neither is what's going on in Gaza. And these things cannot be separated. And certainly that's his point. They can't be separated. But in any case, okay, this guy who attacked the march and yelled, all Zionists should die, or something to that effect, as that's awful. And it's terrible. And, as I said, I believe in my last video, even if people or a person or a group of people hold a political view that is not just one we disagree with, but is really quite objectionable and really, horrific. White supremacy, white nationalism, Nazism, any of those things, it's awful. But if all they're doing is talking and demonstrating, they have the right to do that and are not legitimate targets for anything other than counter protest and debate. That is the limit of what you do, and that's how you fight really heinous, what I would certainly consider really heinous political ideologies. That's how you do that. I think the Council on American Islamic Relations really put this very well. Their statement read as follows: this attack on the Run for Our Lives march in Boulder was a heinous and unacceptable crime. The person who perpetrated this violence in Boulder is a criminal whose unacceptable actions do not in any way represent the countless Americans of diverse backgrounds who are peacefully advocating for an end to the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Peaceful protests, political engagement, and civil disobedience are the only ways to change policies in our nation. As we speak out against this unacceptable crime in Boulder, we must also reject the cynical attempts by anti-Palestinian racists and anti-Muslim extremists who seek to use this attack to justify their own bigotry and their war on free speech in America. Unlike those politicians who have never once condemned any of the shootings, stabbings, car rammings, beatings, and other violence directed at pro-Palestine demonstrators and who actively support genocidal violence against Palestinians in Gaza, people of conscience condemn all criminal violence against all people here and abroad. That's called moral consistency. Couldn't agree more. I think it's a perfect statement. And to be honest, I wish I was seeing more such statements from the various groups who are out there protesting against the genocide in Gaza, because the philosophical underpinnings of the protests of people who are opposed to the genocide of Palestine of Palestinians are come from various different directions, right? There's the basic, I think the basic ethical imperative to abhor and protest and try to stop in any way we can genocide. um but then there's also a sort of ideological component where we analyze and see how did the genocide come to be. What is you know what is at the core of the genocide. And of course, I don't think it unfair, in fact I think it correct, to identify the political ideology of Zionism as being at the core, which is not to say that Zionism or every Zionist ever was always this level of genocidal, although we have seen it before. I mean, this isn't particularly different than what was being done in 1948, or from really 47 and 48, um, to the Palestinians, and happened again on a somewhat smaller scale in 1967. And has gotten sort of and that sort of we call it settler colonialism, we call it apartheid. Those systems have also been institutionalized, certainly since 1967, to create a situation in all of what was once mandatory Palestine, that where Israel is ultimately in control of everything and everyone, and has increasingly taken on a sense of nationalistic purity. I don't like to use the word racial because that would be a misnomer here. You have people of Arab descent on all sides. You have people, all sorts of different people living in that area, and historically, that's been the crossroads of most of the world, for centuries, which is why you have such a diverse group of people in that area. But the increasing nationalism, the increasing ethnocentrism and hostility that has bred, found its expression in the siege of Gaza that was lasting for years and years and years before October 7th, the occupation that had lasted since 1967, the dispossession of Palestinians that began in earnest in 1947, and the sense that even before that, that held for many Zionists on many levels, that the Jewish state had to operate largely, if not entirely, on the strength of the Jewish people. And non-Jewish people, Arabs, would be at best a tolerated minority. That was what Zionism was, even before it took on its ugliest forms, as we've seen recently. And as the Israeli right, the far right in Israel, has gained more and more power, and these things have become more explicit. So it is an ideology, and others may see Zionism differently, and that's fine. But if you see Zionism in what I think is the correct historical light, it is an ideology that's hateful. It is an ideology that I think justice speaks to opposing. But there are also many, many people who still consider themselves Zionists in some sense. They may not like what Israel has become. They may not like what Israel has done. They may in fact hate on some level the Israeli right, even the center right, quote unquote, as opposed to the far right that the Bezalel Smotriches and Itamar Ben-Gvirs represent. Look, I know Zionists who have, risked their lives to protect Palestinians. I know, and we can talk about how that's still, it's still not enough, and it still doesn't speak to the full justice and full equality. That's a debate, and that's fine. But what I'm talking about now is the anti-Zionist rhetoric that has gotten so heated. And it was already happening before October 7th, but once the genocide began, for understandable reasons, it got to the point, I think, of fanaticism, and I don't think it is healthy for anyone. I don't think rage brings a solution, and I see a lot of rage in anti-Zionism these days. Um, I mean, going back again to the DC attacks, we know from the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., which I think is on this point a reliable source, that the shooter stalked his two victims from the Israeli embassy to the event where he at the Jewish Museum where he finally did shoot them. That I think uh, says something about where his head was, and that he felt that two low-level operatives in the embassy were somehow a legitimate target. And how do you justify that in your own mind? Well, you justify that because they're Zionists, and if they're Zionists, then they deserve what they get, or they deserve. Even if he thought maybe they weren't really the ones who really deserved this ultimate penalty, but they were legitimate targets for some act that would, in his mind anyway, help Palestinians. I think it tremendously hurt Palestinians. And I don't see how anyone reasonably comes to a different conclusion. But if you do, that's fine. But it doesn't make it any more moral. The fact of the matter is, the Palestine rights movement has only one thing in its favor: was we don't have political power. We're not going to get political power at any time soon. The most powerful political forces are right on the other side. The geostrategic interests of Europeans, of the United States, and of Arab leaders in the Middle East do not support Palestinian rights. And I want people to stop and consider what a Palestinian victory means. Palestinian victory means that justice, ethics, human rights, and a sense that people are all equal have triumphed over geostrategic interests, over economic interests, over military interests, over the interests of the powerful. And that's why all these people don't want to see Palestine succeed. So what we have is going for us is a mass movement. And we have that because of the moral high ground. Attacking two low-level functionaries at the Israeli embassy, two young people who have their lives ahead of them, and who knows where they could end up being. I mean, many powerful allies to the Palestinian rights movement have been veteran Zionists, longtime Zionists who changed their minds. The attack in Boulder was an attack on people who were certainly expressing a political view, but ultimately it's self-defeating because they weren't doing anything. They were simply marching for hostages to be released. That was their statement at that event. And then in the aftermath, it was used by cynical people and by people who are frankly supportive of the genocide, be they in the American government, be they the CEO of the ADL, who is one of the great Jew haters in the world, be it the Prime Minister of Israel. All of these people have used that event to justify their ongoing crimes, and they've met little resistance on that point. In fact, there are still people, even among liberals and on the left, who are saying, yeah, okay, well, this was an anti-Semitic attack. It wasn't. And it's really important that we recognize that. It doesn't make it okay. In no way does it legitimize what happened in DC or what happened in Boulder. There is no way that those things are legitimate. They don't have to be anti-Semitic to be wrong. And wrong they are. And we need to stick with that. But we need to keep that in mind. This is not the way. Okay, dehumanizing the other side is not going to help rid us of our own dehumanization. And this is important. Look, it is a difficult thing, believe me, because I have been engaging in this work literally every day for many, many years. It is a very, very difficult thing to feel like you're talking about stopping the murder of babies, stopping the starvation of 2 million people. And you're getting an argument back. You're getting back an argument of why we can't do that, or we shouldn't do that, or why that's not happening at all. It is maddening. We are all not being heard, and people who feel like they are not heard often lash out in ways we saw in DC and in Boulder. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened in those cases. I don't know those people, but I do know that when people feel like they are trying and trying and trying and nothing else is getting through, they take desperate measures. That happens. And it's something we need to guard against. It doesn't have to happen. If we in this movement say, you know, uh, we are against Zionism, that doesn't mean we hate every Zionist. That's not the message that a lot of people are sending out. I've heard it. I saw people on social media after the DC attack post Yaron's tweets where he supported Israel's army in Gaza, supported the genocide. That doesn't make it okay to kill him. Somebody who says to me as a Jew, I'm, and I want to stress this, I'm someone who has experienced anti-Semitic violence. I have been assaulted. I have been beaten with fists. I have been beaten with sticks. I have had rocks thrown at my head. Okay. I've had places where I live vandalized. Okay. I've encountered all of those things in my life. Okay. I take this very seriously and very personally. But if somebody simply says something to me that's highly offensive, Hitler was right. They say to me, this or that, the Jews are controlling the world and making all of these terrible things happen, whatever it may be. I can argue, I can get mad, I can, hurl expletives at them, but it's not an excuse for violence. It just isn't. I may lose my temper. It may happen. I have, to be honest, in my life, in my younger days. But that doesn't make it right. And that's not a way to approach this movement. It's not, because we need the moral high ground. We have to have it. And that means not only saying that, distinguishing between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, that is important. And that's a fight we have to engage in, and I think have to take much more seriously. And I especially call on fellow Jews to take that much more seriously, because in my experience, too many of us right now feel like we can't speak out against anti-Semitism, or we go on the other side and we're looking for ways to say, yes, we are policing our own on anti-Semitism. Neither one of those work. We have to be honest and clear about what is and is not anti-Semitism, and fight what is and work with what is not. Because when I say work with, I'm saying when anti-Zionist rhetoric goes overboard, and we know that, the fact is that really harsh anti-Zionist rhetoric, look, we all know Jewish people who take that and feel attacked personally as Jews, not as Zionists. They take that and feel attacked as Jews, and they're not being, we have the Jonathan Greenblatts and the Netanyahus who cynically manipulate this idea. These are people who have a visceral reaction because they're hearing such hostility to something that they are, and they feel it as anti-Semitism. That's not helping. I don't, whatever other way you want to think about that, I get that if people are still supporting Israel and all this, you don't have much sympathy on them. That's fine. But it's not helping to have this heated rhetoric around every single Zionist. The problem with Netanyahu is not that he's a Zionist. The problem with Netanyahu is that he's a war criminal. Okay. The problem with Jonathan Greenblatt is not that he's a Zionist. The problem is that he's a demagogue who is using anti-Semitism to advance, frankly, very fascist measures in the Trump administration, and has used it to defend indefensible acts by the state of Israel. That's the problem. If he was a Zionist and wasn't doing those things, then where would the problem be? And I'm not saying that we don't argue against Zionism. I'm not saying that we don't, hold on to an anti-Zionist philosophy. If that is your philosophy, that's fine. but demonizing every single person who is a Zionist or has any sympathy for Israel, because there's just too many of them. There's so many people, regular people, who don't necessarily support the genocide. We know that most Americans don't support the genocide, but many of those Americans still do support the existence of Israel. Um, those are people we can talk to. We can work with them, and we can explain to them, look, the existence of Israel as an ethnocratic apartheid state is unacceptable. Make it a truly democratic state, and understand that that includes the West Bank and Gaza. Do those things, and everybody can move on with their lives. There'll still be plenty of problems, but those can be faced together by people of goodwill. But the level of anti-Zionist venom is just not helpful. And I know people, believe me, I know people are angry. We've all lost, I'm not going to compare myself to a Palestinian who's lost. I know Palestinian friends of mine who've literally lost so many members of their families that it's in triple digits. I mean, I've lost some friends. I've lost some colleagues. I can't compare to what Palestinians have, and so I get that there's real legitimate anger, but and on an individual level, we all have to deal and try and support one another as best as we can. But as a movement and organizationally, we have to try and stem this tide of overly hateful rhetoric, because it's not doing us any good, and it is helping, I believe, to aggravate people who are already so frustrated, as so many of us are. And I share in this absolutely the frustration of protesting and yelling and calling our Congress people, and just nobody seems to listen. Nobody seems to care. And that is a frustration that does tend to boil up in some people. We don't need to add on to that with this overly fiery rhetoric. So again, please, if you found this of interest and value, please share this video, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, share it around your email networks. If you can support this work, I implore you to do so. Only with your support can I continue doing this. Working on lining up some more interviews that I think people will find very interesting. I know there's been good responses to the ones I've already done. So please, again, it's mitchellpletnick.substack.com. You can donate. You can become a paid subscriber. You can share this video with your friends and colleagues. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you soon.